Meeting of the Adhoc Capital Debt Committee to order, Thursday, June 13th at 7:32 p.m. I will take a roll call attendance. Mayor Donchis, not here. Alderman Wilshire is here. Alderman O'Brien, not here. Alderman Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Klee is not here. Alderman Gouveia.
Here.
Tim Cummings.
Present.
Matt Sullivan.
Present.
Lisa Photo, not here. So we do have a quorum. All right, open it up to discussion.
Yes, thank you, Madam President, if I may.
You may.
Thank you. So just for the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Administrative Services, to set the table for tonight's conversation. When we last met, there was a discussion about potentially looking at increasing the capacity of essentially the $150 million over the 5 years. And there was an ask of two things of me. One was to discuss the prioritization of projects that need to get done sooner rather than later. The current chart in front of you takes that into consideration and prioritizes the projects, as we've heard from the department heads, over the next year or two. But then the more important item was the discussion about how we could add some capacity into that 150 million by potentially looking at an offset from revenues that might come in from some projects that we're anticipating doing that have a revenue component to that. So with that being said, you received a handout tonight that shows an email that I sent to the various department heads that asked for them to work with their team to develop some projections that basically identified what might be surplus revenues that we could, in theory, dedicate as additional dollars to the debt service fund for the city, which would then, in theory, give some additional capacity for the projected $150 million bonding or $30 million a year that we are looking to undertake based on some of these assumptions. And what the feedback that I got from the three groups, and to identify them, the three projects at hand that may generate some revenue is the parking garages, the hydroelectric improvements, and then Holman Stadium. And so Holman Stadium, the initial feedback that has come back to us is the expenses exceed the revenues, so there really wouldn't be additional quote-unquote free and clear surplus that you could look at. Relative to the garages, it's conservative, I will admit, but there is, in theory, a couple $100,000 that could be used for additional capacity, assuming everything that you see in front of you actually gets adopted. I say that to you because what you see in the handout is the idea of revenues being increased due to fees and permits and meter rates being increased, and that's legislation pending, has not been adopted. I would counsel you not to take that into consideration until after it is adopted. However, wanting to be as transparent as possible, this projection was developed with the assumption that these rates would be adopted in a substantially similar fashion as what the pending legislation calls for. The current projected revenue that you're seeing from parking also has the expenses associated to it. It does not carry right now anything for debt service, as you can see, but it does take into consideration a couple other items. One would be, in theory, what we call a sinking fund, which we would anticipate doing when we move towards that enterprise fund we've discussed, or a payment to the Downtown Improvement Committee, which traditionally has come from the parking revenues here in the city. More recently, it's been changed to be the general fund, but I think there's a ambition to change that back once we continue moving forward with that consolidated enterprise fund or consolidated approach for parking that we've been working towards over the last few years. I say that to you because those items are being deducted from the net surplus. And so if you were to take those deductions, you can see on average it only leaves a couple $100,000 in revenues available that you could, in theory, dedicate towards additional debt service that wouldn't come from the general fund, that in theory we could use to increase our capacity for that year-over-year $30 million target that we're looking to strike a balance on. So you may be asking yourself, okay, well, how much does $200,000 in surplus get us for additional capacity? And so rough numbers, I will tell you, average 20 years average or equal principal and debt with a 4% interest rate, you can roughly assume we can borrow for every $75-ish thousand an additional $1 million. So again, keeping it conservative, I would suggest you use for every $100,000 in additional monies could equal approximately an additional $1 million in debt service capacity increase. So that is a good rough guideline for you to use as we continue the conversation this evening. Moving on from parking, we do have Director Sullivan with us this evening. He can go into much greater detail than I will when it comes to the hydroelectric program that the city runs. But the essential bottom line is, over the next 5 years, the projected revenue versus the projected operating expenses leaves us actually in a deficit, if you will. There would not be additional surplus per se over the 5-year horizon. So at this time, it is recommended that we don't take anything into consideration similar to like Holman Stadium. But obviously that is open to discussion. There is some assumptions made here that's relative to the revenue projections, which we are being very conservative on. But what you do see is a very stable expenses and debt service line item. So we have an understanding of what our debt and operating expenses are. What is really tough to forecast is that revenue. And so we're being very conservative of a $1.5 million revenue forecast at this time. We are not advised to change that. And so I say that to you to be as forthright as possible, but that is obviously a variable or a dynamic that could change this greatly. And so you may want to, as we revisit this plan, ideally year over year, revisit this particular conversation as you see actuals on the revenue, because could there be a case where you see us bring in $2 million, an additional $500,000 more than we're projecting? The answer is yes, but it would be my counsel to you to do that on a year by year type basis if you wanted to change that $30 million target. So, Madam President, those are my opening comments this evening to help set the table. The goal, I hope, this evening is to further our previous discussion and try to bring this to some sort of consensus so we can have a good understanding of what our long-term financial capital plan will be.
Alderman Dow.
Yeah, just a couple of things. One, my suggestion on Stellus is to have risk management take a look at the field based on the communications we had at the Board of Aldermen meeting, the last one, and what I've heard from the school department. The field does have issues, and you could probably put it off maybe a year, but I would rather have an assessment from risk, because if somebody gets hurt because the field wasn't fixed, that's a city issue. It is worn, and there are places that are not conducive to bouncing off. So it's something to consider, so that you have a better idea when to place it on this schedule, because it'll have to be done fairly soon.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Director Cummings.
I would have to double check, but I believe the schools did put it on their list. I'm just not exactly sure where it fell.
It is, on their list, and
But yes, to your point, Alderman Dowd, I'd be happy to look into that further.
I think I have the CIP, but I mean, if they had their druthers, they'd do it now, but they know the situation we're in with bonding. But I would feel more comfortable if Jen DeShane took a look at it and talked to the people, and we had a better idea from a risk standpoint where we're at with that, because there are kids playing on the field all the time, and we don't want any kids to get hurt if we can help it, so, we need to look at that.
Okay.
The only other thing is I don't think it's on the list, the security vestibule project. We have one left to do, New Searles. The original estimate was out of whack, and we sent it back to the drawing board. It's gonna come in a lot less than the 2.4 million that was projected. So, the bonding will be less if the legislation I put in was read for the first time at the Board of Alderman meeting, last meeting, was moving the 200,000 left from Franklin Street into the security vestibule project. And then the balance could either be a bond, cash, or year-end funding, but that would be the only school left outside of Mount Pleasant, which is a whole different story. And security vestibules are pretty important.
So if I may, Madam Chair.
Director Cummings.
So this goes back to an earlier point that I tried making at the last meeting, which was ideally it would be good guidance for staff to get an understanding as to the right amount of percentage we want to dedicate to deferred capital maintenance from education vis-a-vis general government. And as this plan outlines, it takes into consideration our $30 million target, and then it roughly suggests about something in the order of magnitude of about $9-ish million. So round numbers, we're really kind of focusing on about 30 to 33% of the total capacity that we would have for debt service year over year for education. And what would help is to get an understanding as to whether that is something we want to continue with, or we want to adjust it up or adjust it down, knowing all these other needs that we have, and recognizing that this is the only plan that has approvals in place as well that takes into consideration some school projects that aren't that would be above and beyond that debt service allocation that is programmed in here. So they requested about 15 million, so it is not fulfilling their request, but it is I think a good conversation from a policy perspective to make sure we city staff have good guidance as to whether a quarter, or a third, half, whatever that percentage is, we can kind of keep in the back of our minds for planning purposes.
All of it. On that vein, in this plan for deferred maintenance, are you indicating that will take effect in FY '25? Because it's one of the things I'm gonna do is add 400,000 in the budget for deferred maintenance for the schools, because it's 100,000 now, which is ridiculous. And the fire department is seeking another 25,000. They get 50,000 for their 6 stations, and they're having all kinds of high vac issues, which will probably be addressed downstream after the report comes in. But just their maintenance on high vac systems is gonna chew up a lot of that money. So if we're not going to have the deferred maintenance plan taking effect in '25, we need to add to the deferred maintenance line for the schools, because
Yep.
you get 20 buildings, and, as I explained to you earlier before the meeting started, Manchester's now facing a $900 million school issue on their infrastructure because they haven't taken care of it.
So two issues that I think we need to flush out, if I may, Madam President. One, to answer your question, Alderman Dowd, this in theory wouldn't take effect until FY '27. That's when it's currently programmed here. So if you were to do something you would need to do it sooner in the FY25 budget if that's the pleasure of the body. But we are talking about debt service here and the debt service budget, which would be for bonding, vis-a-vis what I think you're referencing, which might be cash that you'd be looking to add to the operational budget, either somewhere else in the in the citywide operational budget, or maybe within the school department itself directly. But it would be, I think what you're suggesting is a certain dollar amount for capital needs, but we would really be using cash for that. And so, and I say that to make a very nuanced distinction, and we need to have this conversation as to how we want to handle this. Over time, I would like to get the deferred capital maintenance handled through a cash type of appropriation. We are not there yet. It's something that's highlighted in green because, not only schools, but also our paving program as well. If we plan accordingly, we should try to roll that into the DPW's operational budget. And in theory, that would then increase capacity in our debt service plan to be able to do more capital-related projects. And so we don't have those plans in place today. It's something I would encourage us to work toward, but we do need that type of direction.
I think last year, the deferred maintenance, when we added, I think we added 350, no, we added a little bit of that. It ended up coming out of year-end funding, but it was still in the budget, so.
Correct, Alderman Dowd. I believe it was an escrowing process that we did.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. Going to the chart for the hydroelectric, shows net revenue by year, and from 2025 to 2029, or 2027, there's a deficit. My question is, are these numbers factoring in the new $7 million loan?
They are not, Alderman Clemmons. This does not include the expected debt service on a $7 million note starting approximately in 2026. Madam Chair, if I may just make a few comments to supplement what Director Cummings had said. I want to be very clear that the projections for revenue here, and Director Cummings represented them as conservative, they are hyper-conservative, quite frankly. I was very sensitive about putting these numbers in front of the committee. Although I'd like to tell a wonderful story about how we're collecting a significant amount of revenue and it makes sense to move this into an enterprise fund, I'm sensitive to the fact that there are so many elements that are variable in nature, and I'm very hesitant to even bring the trend line forward of what we've been making over the last few years. But just to give you a sense of what I mean, even in 2024, our projected revenues, based on largely year-to-date numbers, with only one facility running, is $1.7 million. Our Jackson Mills facility has been down for the year. In 2025, we included only $1.2 million of revenue in the budget based on, again, being conservative and expecting a partial run of Jackson Mills. It's very possible as we look forward to 2026 and 2027, that could be $2.2, $2.3, $2.4, $2.5 million. It's also based on electricity rates and the ability to net meter. We're also installing a new, more efficient turbine. All of those things to say that while this does tell a somewhat bleak picture, any year of 2.2 or $2 million of revenue drastically changes the available revenue to pay down debt service. And so I want to make that clear for everyone tonight, and it's very hard to project our revenues, but I just wanted to explain that conservatism in this.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. I think when Mr. Griffin was here, he brought up a very good point about maybe we shouldn't put that into an enterprise fund anyway because of the tax implications.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest with you, this is a little disappointing because in my opinion now I think something up here has to be cut. Because I don't want to bond up to $150 million over the next 5 years.
Alderman GOV.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I kind of want to echo the point that Alderman Clemens just made. And I mean, we passed a resolution as a board not to bond more than $30 million a year for 5 years. We didn't say, let's bond $150 million total in the next 5 years. And the first thing we're going to do is pass a program that bonds $55 million in the first year. We just said we wanted to keep it under 30. And don't get me wrong, I think every project we've talked about in this committee, worthwhile, should happen. I object to how quickly we're doing it, how we're stacking them year by year, and how it really has to do with the speed. I think we need to spread this out more. We should be under 30 million a year, and I think we should be even well under. I think we should be 20, 25 million a year. Solely because we know something's gonna come up in the next 5 years. I would love to say, let's bond right up to 29.9 million, and we're gonna stay right there, we're gonna have no issues, and we're gonna be just fine. But we know something's gonna pop up. It's just a matter of what and how much it's gonna cost. And to put a proposal forward that already has us 2 steps behind, we're just saying, all right, well, here's the dream proposal. And when the first thing goes wrong, we'll reconvene and we'll just amend it. I'd rather have something come forward out of this committee that is a in-depth walkthrough of this is what we're gonna do. We've considered that X, Y, or Z is gonna happen. We know there could be an emergency here, here, or here. In some years, we might use that extra 5 million. Some years we might not. Some years we might bond up to 28 million. Some years we might not. And that's kind of where I'm sitting here. This is, for me, very hard to support for that reason if we passed a resolution saying we didn't want to bond over 30 a year, and the first thing we're doing is bonding 55.5. So that's kind of where I'm sitting at now, and I think we have to have a real tough conversation at moving some projects around to help us fit in that threshold.
Alderman Clemens.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I disagree a little bit with what my colleague from Ward 1 just said, only in the sense that we did say 30 million a year, yes, in that resolution. However, it's understood that it's 150 million over the next 5 years, and that some years are gonna be higher than others. And I had no problem with that. That's not where, from my perspective, that is not the issue. The issue to me, because essentially the debt service, issuing a bond does not mean that all of a sudden you're paying that debt service. The project has to move forward. That's just when you're issuing the yes, we're going ahead and doing that. So to me, you can figure out how you want to do that over the next 5 years. The bottom line is the 150. That being said, I do think that I do agree with the point that we don't want to go up to that 150. So I don't know what, I don't know where to cut this.
May I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It would help us if we could maybe, before we start to think about project specifics, to talk a little bit about maybe some guidance as to what our comfort level is if it's something less than 30 million. Immediately I started to say, okay, because we can present whatever plan you'd like, maybe we need to reduce this on, and I'm making this up for conversation purposes solely, maybe we need to reduce it by 10% a year. That would be roughly a $3 million reduction. Does that create enough capacity? And if that's the case, and that's good guidance for us, we can build that into a plan, and we can reprogram this. If $3 million is not enough, we need guidance as to what it is that you'd like to see as a target. I've heard, and I heard Alderman Govea say something like 25 million. So if it's more like 20%, 6 million, okay, let's have that conversation, and we can start to then, you can then start to look and see which projects that kind of fits with, and we can work towards massaging the plan appropriately.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I think that's a good conversation to start with. Alderman Govea.
Yeah, and I think to my colleague at large's point, I see what you're saying about the 150 million, and I don't necessarily disagree. With me, it's we're doing it in year one. If we did really good for 4 years, and we're under what that plan is, and we want to have a $55 million bond year, then sure, have at it. For me, it's we're spending a lot of this money up front, and that's concerning me for what's going to happen in those final 2-3 years. So if this was kind of reversed and we were under a lot at the beginning, and then kind of near the end as we had less variables, then yeah, I could probably get on board with that.
Director Cummings.
So to that point, I want to make two really distinct points here. One, this is advisory only. There's nothing that holds us to this. This is to help us as we do future planning. And so nothing is etched into stone, and we're not bonding anything after this. There'd be a lot of work necessary. Second to that, there will be fluidity with this plan. Case in point, I'm going to say right now, and we got Director Sullivan here, who's probably going to crucify me for saying what I'm about to say. We have $7 million programmed into FY25. I can tell you with some real confidence, we're not really going to spend $7 million in FY25. Are we going to spend $3 million? Probably, maybe. I don't even know if we're going to get $3 million right now. But what I do know is Director Sullivan has emphasized to me that in the next 24 months, in the next 36 months, we're going to need to spend something like $7 million. And so you will see this as we reevaluate this year over year, some of this slide to the right as we go. And some of these numbers will become more real as we actually start to do the design of the project, and we actually have a better understanding as to the cost of them. So I say that to you so you don't necessarily feel some of the pressure that maybe you're feeling right now. It's more of a good way to give staff some guidance so we can help you prioritize the projects for the community. And then the final point is one of the reasons why the numbers are so high right now, Alderman Gouveia, is because we already have approved resolutions that we took into consideration up front that I would be disingenuous to suggest that they were anywhere else but right up front in the plan.
Alderman Dowd.
Just some information for somebody who's dealt with bonds for a long time. Just because we pass $7 million for hydroelectric or any of these projects, two things. One, you're not going to spend all of that to the penny. There's going to be money left because we don't ever budget to the exact dollar because that's insane. Because there's contingencies in there, and there are other things that there's money that isn't spent or is left. The other thing is that these projects don't happen in 25. They happen over, some of them may be 25, 26, 27 before they finish. And as I stated right in the beginning, the amount that we allocate for bonds isn't the real question. Relative to the city budget, it's debt service. So if you took those numbers, take everything else off, and just do 25, and look at where the money's going to be spent. And remember, we pay our bills originally out of cash, and then replace them with a bond. They have to sell a bond. And if you looked at the debt service, that would be the addition to the debt service from the existing bonds, which is, I think, in my discussions with John Griffin, that's the concern. We don't want the debt service to be too high. But you could, just like that bridge that we're going to, I don't know if we approved that yet or not, but it's like $3.5 million bond, which would appear on the list, approved in 25, but it's not going to be spent till 29 or 27, and allocated, the monies will be paid over a couple of years probably. So it's more important to me anyway, if I were John Griffin, to look at how much of this bond for 25 is going to be had to have bonds actually issued in 25 or 26 or 27, because they will go over 2 or 3 years. Same thing with 26, those will, you know, and those bonds in 29, you know, will be after the 5 years, when we actually issue a bond and do the payment. So, I mean, it's nice to see that we want to go for 30 million in bonds, but one, probably can say 10% of that will never be spent. And money will be left over from them, it can be applied to other projects, perhaps. And they're not spent, that 55 million is not spent in 25. I mean, I'm looking up there, I can tell you from some of these projects, I know they're not getting spent in 25.
Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, and I, to your point, I definitely agree. We have a very good track record of having projects come in under budget. I think our city does very good at that. But for this sense of budgeting and forecasting like this, I'm looking at the worst possible outcome we could have on every project. I'd rather over-deliver on delivering a project under budget than start talking that, I don't know, we'll get 10, 12% back. And I think that's kind of where I think we could get in trouble, is saying, well, this project, we'll probably get 10% back on this one. We'll probably get 12, and we start speculating that how much we're not gonna spend on each bond. And I think from a forecasting standpoint, we're looking at bonding 16 million, we're doing 16 on the nose, and that's where it will be. And I definitely understand we probably will come under, and that's great. But from a standpoint like this, it's not something I wanna rely on coming under. I'd rather hope for the best, but expect the worst at the same time.
Okay. So, Alderman Clemens.
Yeah, again, I don't know what we would cut out of here or how we would do that. You know, but I'm thinking, I mean, I don't know. It's a tough situation to be in. Something has to give, though. So I don't know if we can, to Alderman Dowd's point, if these numbers can be sharpened. I know that they're high. They're conservative numbers. But you know, I don't know if the best course of action is to just take the bottom line of each one of those columns, subtract 3 million from them and say, do what you can do. And throw it back to the staff and say, you know, instead of 55.5, you know, it's 3 million less. And you go across the bottom line like that and do that.
Is that right?
Thank you, Madam President. One thing I would like to point out is that when you're getting to the point where you're thinking of bonding these projects, it's imperative that we talk to the project managers of each of the projects and get the spending schedule. So a lot of these projects that you see in fiscal year 25 probably will span 25, 26. So you're probably not going to end up bonding the 55 that it is showing here anyway, because things happen. You know, we plan and we hope, but we all know that even the best plans usually get delayed. So although it has 55 here, I truly could tell you with the spending schedule, it probably won't happen. You have an 18-month look-back period from the point in which you bond to the expenditures that have happened. So you have 18 months of spending cash before you bond a project. So you're talking a year and a half right there. So if it says 55 here, that's probably gonna be pushed forward anyway. So just food for thought.
Alderman Dowd.
Just, one other thing, you know, I'm looking at these projects, and of course, the ones that are already bonded, it's fait accompli. There will be money coming back from those, I can assure you. But now, we've sort of gone a long way on the police training facility. Are we gonna tell the police department we can't move them over there? And that just drives that cost up. The parking garages, that's probably one thing we could look at from a phased approach. Do the most critical safety items now, and maybe, you know, if you're concerned about the numbers on the bond, you bond some lower number to fix the critical things now, and bond maybe the following year or whatever, the other improvements. The hydro improvements, I don't know how that phasing works out, because I don't know that much about it. And so, I mean, you know, the police station is pretty far along in the planning. I mean, we're at the point now where Tim, I think we're gonna be coming in with a number, final number, and the parking garages are a safety issue. And the hydro improvements, you know, we got the whatever you want to call it, the generator or turbine on its way from Croatia or wherever else it's coming from. And, you know, that's, you know, what are we gonna have it sit here? We can't have it sit because that's an issue. It's gotta be installed, so what are you gonna cut?
Director Sullivan.
Just as a point of clarification to Alderman Dowd's comments, these improvements are actually related to the 3 megawatt facility at Mine Falls, just as an FYI for folks. Just to be clear about what this is, and I think this may lead to some conversation about whether these costs can be deferred. This is a relicensing of that facility. And so that will include design. It will be a phased process. And so while Deb Chisholm would have my head for making this comment, this could be potentially a cash project for the first year, or there could be some smaller amount of authorization. We know that we need to start over fiscal 25. Do we need all $7 million available? We do not. And to Ms. Enright's comments, you know, this project is going to take years. The authorization will not hit for some time. And so, you know, I don't want to be the sacrificial lamb, but I'm comfortable moving some of that authorization out to fiscal 26. My ask will be that some monies be available for design for the FERC process in 25. And however that's structured, I think to Director Cummings' comments, given a bit of guidance from this committee, I think we can work on this internally to shift some of these expenses around.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, one quick thing. One thing that I've had a couple discussions with Tim on. A lot of the projects we've done in the past, we go ahead, we pass a bond for some number $1 million, and then we go out and hire somebody to do the design. They review the design, and then you give it to then you go out and hire a construction manager, and they price it. And before that's all done, you don't have a really solid number for the bond. We had talked about how can we get the design done on dollars from somewhere, and then the construction manager's pricing before you actually hire them to do the work, get the pricing done, so that you have a really solid number when you're coming forth with a bond, and, as was pointed out, the spend schedule. I mean, that's a much better way of doing business, but we've avoided that over the years, so I think it's time that we find a way to do that.
Director Cummings.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more with the previous speaker, and I think we're working in that mindset. We're going to start, I think, using our capital budget to start prioritizing design work, and we will use cash to pay for design, which will answer a lot of these questions, and we'll be able to have more confidence move these projects forward. To some degree, we're paralyzed because we're not sure which projects to move forward. And we're not really sure which projects to move forward because we're not really sure what the cost is gonna be. And we're definitely not sure what actually the spend schedule is gonna be, because we haven't done a lot of some of this upfront work. But we need to have some level of agreement that the list here is the list that people relatively are in agreement with, or relatively we're in agreement on the numbers. And then we can see as time goes on how this, the work of the city is coming together, and we can see if it aligns. And again, every year we will come to you and have a proactive conversation in the springtime to try to make the plan align with the reality that we're seeing. But right now, case in point, I believe it's pretty fair to say that we're gonna move forward with a 9 Riverside Police Training Facility. We're almost at 100% design on that project, but we have no bond authorization on that. Ideally, that will be something that we bond this year. We do sometime in the fall, over the next year or so. But it would be disingenuous to move that one project forward without this body having a proactive conversation about all your other ideas and capital projects that you'd like to see, because inevitably, to Alderman Clemens' point, there may be a project that doesn't rise. And staff would not be doing any of you any service to not force you to have this conversation, so we can then execute appropriately.
Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yeah, I think what I would like to personally see would be another plan with those cuts, like you said. Let's see one where we're at 30 million a year, and then I'd even like to see one at 25 million a year and just play with that. As for what we cut, I mean, I'm not at director level. I can't rank those projects. I'm trying to stay at a 10,000 foot dollar and cents level here. I don't think that would really be too appropriate of me to say, oh, this is what department needs more than the other. I think every department needs stuff, and I think we have the directors who can advise us on what's more important and what we need when. I'd like to see those two different kind of ideas and plans play out and then take it from there. And another concern I've had was with the all the expenditures that were under $1 million. We talked about a bunch of them paying those with cash. And I know me and Alderman Clemens had the conversation, well, what if the cash isn't there? If there's no cash available for these, well, these are pretty immediate needs and fixes that if we have to bond for them, that's something we're gonna have to account for. We don't have any estimated escrows projections, so we don't know if we're gonna be able to afford all of these fixes. Looking at, I mean, even FY25, that's 2.775 million. Do we have that? I don't know. That stuff needs to be done. So it's all stuff we should be taking into account.
So if I may, Madam Chair.
Sure, come in.
Excellent point that was just made. I think if we could move this conversation along, and if this had gone on the original trajectory that I hoped it would have, you would have seen this 2.75 populated in the FY operating budget under capital.
Okay.
We didn't, but what CFO Griffin and I are in ongoing conversations of to keep this plan relatively intact is having this as part of the escrowing process for this year only, and then catching up so we're into FY26. And what I believe we are in, again, we need affirmative reaction from the Board of Aldermen, but it's our recommendation that we improve our capital expending budget to about 2.5 million. So year over year, you're gonna see a capital expenditure budget in the FY26 and so on budgets. That's gonna have a target of about $2.5 million. That will then allow us to do the programming that we're talking about. Ideally, we will start to use that budget in a way to help inform our bonding plan and our debt service budget, because we'll start doing design with cash.
Okay. Thank you.
That makes sense. I like that idea.
Yeah.
Alderman Clemens.
Can you Can you go back to the debt service draft plan? So I guess my question is this, what, if we were to tell you to go back and redo this, what would you do? I mean, what would that look like?
Director Cummings.
So to sharpen my pencil, one of the things I think I would do, but I would need to have some consultation, and I'm gonna pick on Hydro a little bit because Director Sullivan's here, but I have a feeling it may potentially look a little something like this. Well, it's definitely not gonna be 3,000. But, you know, it's probably gonna look something like this, and it's probably that's probably a little bit more what it's gonna look like. Could it go something like this, or could it be 3.5? Yeah, I mean, but Director Sullivan, if I may, Madam Chair, Director Sullivan, are you at any level of design yet where you know that we're actually at $7 million?
No, we're not,
So
Chair,
that's-
if I may. So
so that's the
we're
other
not. And so this is speculative in nature, certainly. But if I were to answer the question for Director Cummings, it's exactly that. It would be consultation with each of the directors to try and strategically move these items and phase the impact to the debt service payments over time. Ultimately, I think there are projects that may be imminent needs that need to move substantially that don't have the flexibility of the hydro project. Those are gonna be more challenging, obviously, but I think Director Cummings will have to work with each of the directors to make those changes.
Alderman Clemmons?
Thank you. I appreciate what you just did, but that didn't change the bottom line figure. And that's more of my concern. Because again, I've stated, you know, for me, it's the 150 million that has to be reduced. So, I mean, I guess the question is, are any of these projects able to be moved out to 2031, 2032, 2033?
Yeah, I mean, if I may, Madam Chair, before we continue on, you see me highlighting that one right there. I can tell you right now, we could move that one out. I think that's very reasonable to say. I would have to go through and, with a closer eye on this, to do the analysis that's being asked for right now. But this is the type of conversation we need to have. And so we can do that level of analysis, because ultimately what we want to get to is a place where Director Sullivan has some confidence that he knows he has a hydro project on the horizon, that there will be relatively 10 votes available. We know that that is a priority for the community, and we haven't had that conversation yet. But what I'm hearing you say is it sounds as though this would be a priority, so we should be working towards that goal.
Alderman Clemmons?
Okay, and then, so can you explain to me, the one that you're highlighting now, what is that streetscaping?
Sure, Cummings.
Thank you. Yeah, so we already have money authorized to redo West Pearl Street from what is typically referred to as a streetscaping perspective. Now you just asked, what is streetscaping? So that is all the aesthetic and visuals that you would see if you were looking at the street. It's not the underground infrastructure per se, which may need to be replaced, and we would need to talk about, but the concept was the sidewalks are not ADA compliant. We need to redo the sidewalks. The roadway, hasn't been repaved and needs to be repaved. There is some branding elements to it, and there was some ideas of doing some reprogramming of trees that have been cut down over the years, and so we priced it out. We originally bonded about $1 million for the project, $1.5 million, We know we need an additional million and a half to do the project, and so if we want to continue with the idea of, redeveloping West Pearl Street, that would be, this would be where we would do it. It goes hand in glove with the Walnut Street oval conversion project that we're trying to do, and the reversal, and where we're trying to reverse the direction of West Pearl Street. And so we've heard over the years that this is a priority, so we wanted to represent it here so we could continue to have funding for it, if that was the pleasure of the body.
Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, is that $2 million necessary for the reversal of the street?
Director Cummings.
So I'm thinking about that question of, and you're asking me to pick out one task within a scope of work that was, designed and essentially funded and costed out. I would say it is part of. It's not all of that $2 million, but it is
What
mainly the
percentage?
sidewalks, and we were trying to do the sidewalks as cheap as possible, using the existing curb, basically just relining the existing curb differently, but allowing for more space so we would become ADA compliant.
So
Alderman Clemmons.
is that, so what percentage of the 2 million is that? If you had to guess, ballpark figure.
%, 25%, because I'm taking into consideration the authorization that we have. So, right, we already authorized about $1.5 million for West Pearl Street, but that's not enough. But if we just did the reversal, that's probably another 500,000.
So that would be a priority for me, to do the reversal, but not necessarily the other stuff that's in there.
All set? Alderman
Yeah.
Dow.
Yeah, the other thing that we're not looking at, that I'm keenly aware of, is this is only new bonding. We're not looking at the bonding schedule, which has all the things that we've bonded over the last 30 years. And every year, some of those get paid off. Like a year ago, we paid off the high school project, which was $175 million, down to zero. So when you look at the total bonding schedule, there are things coming off every one of those years. So the amount of money that you're bonding as a city isn't necessarily an issue per se. First of all, we're never gonna get to zero bonding because the city would never pass the muster on being one of the best cities in the country. We're nowhere near what we could be bonding and still be within all the guidelines, including our local ordinances. We're not even close. The key, again, is debt service. So if you look at the whole bonding schedule, you're gonna see, especially in 2030, I'm keenly aware there are a bunch of things falling off. And the total amount of bonding is also a key piece in this puzzle. And you have to measure that against what we should be bonding as a viable city. Those are important aspects of what we're doing here. This is just new bonding. If you look at the existing bonding schedule, which I don't have my copy with me, but, there's debt service being paid on, actually, it might be in the budget book, a whole bunch of projects that, and every year we pay off part of the principal and we pay the interest, and every year the principal portion gets reduced and we end up, if we did nothing, that number would go, I suppose, could go to zero at some point, but we would be in a position where we're not spending the amount of money we need to spend to keep this city viable. That's the key. So, trying to get to 25 million or 30 million bonding over this 5 years, that's not the number. If you got the overall bonding schedule, you'd see that, money's coming off every year. And so the money that we're looking at in this schedule with new bonding is just adding to that, but there's money coming off as well.
I would think that CFO Griffin had taken that into account when he told us we should stick to 30 million a year.
He did. He was looking at the debt service. He was not looking at the amount of bond money. He's looking at the debt service that gets into the budget. So over the next 5 years, particularly in the next 2 or 3 years, there aren't a lot of things getting reduced enough to where the debt service is climbing. And we want to get to the point where the debt service stays pretty linear over time. And it's starting to raise a little bit. So over the next 5 years, we want that curve to get back to normal.
So to that end, CFO Griffin, one of the reasons he recommended 30 million year over year was the thought process that it would bring us to roughly approximately the guidance that the bonding agencies tell us to spend on, in terms of having a debt service relative to your operating budget. And also taking into consideration the needs of the community, while balancing it with, and this is ultimately the decision that you need to make, is to keep a stable tax rate. And if we only want the tax rate to go up between 3% and 4% year over year, this is the type of guidance that we need to get from you all so we can achieve that.
Okay. That's fair. Alderman Dow.
Just one other thing that I'm keenly aware of is any one of these projects you push off, you drive the price up. So you may push it off a year or two, but you're gonna drive the price up, which is normal consideration, but that will also affect the debt service in that year. So, and I think the key thing is that the one things that we have to do are the safety issues. And of course, we already have, in 25, we already have some bonds that are already in place. We're adding to it. So, the parking garages, do we do nothing to the parking garages? And I don't think we can do that.
No.
But I think we could phase them. And I don't think that's been looked at.
So, Madam President, I think we brought the conversation as far as we can tonight.
Sounds that way.
I think we can come back to you. We can definitely sharpen our pencil here. I would ask. It sounds as though maybe $5-ish million, approximately year over year, would be the reduction level necessary to have some additional capacity for those emergency situations. We won't just cut blindly that, but we will work to try to massage these numbers appropriately so it can fit in without unilaterally cutting a project just for the ease or sake of reducing this by 5 million year over year. But the question I ask, and I really want to make sure we're comfortable with, is the list of projects on the left-hand side. We're all in relative agreement that these are the projects that should be moving forward vis-a-vis some of the projects that I've placed down here a little bit further south. And that is really the question at hand, because all this work up here, won't matter materially if someone comes up and says, we need to do X, Y, and Z project over some of these over here. And if that's the case, we need to have that conversation now.
Yeah, that's fair. Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, no, I think the list of projects is up there on the top are all the ones that I would suggest. The, I think that the streetscaping, I made this clear, I think that should be reduced. If you think the senior center can hold off for 5 years, I think that should happen. You know, but it's not that I don't agree with those projects, it's just if, you know, there's priorities within them, right? So, that being said, though, I think that is the list, and I say that because I don't think the fire department's ready for a new fire station, because that would be the only other one that I think would move up, but if they can wait 5 years, then I think that would be top on my list for the next, you know, fiscal 20, or fiscal 30.
So to that end, if I may?
Sure.
Madam President, that type of conversation is exactly what we need, because what I'd like to do is work with Director Sullivan, and maybe in FY '26, FY '27, working with Chief Buxton, start to program design money in our capital budget for, I'm gonna say for this conversation, $500,000, and then that would get us to a certain level of design, that then we would have a better understanding as to how to put that in.
Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, and and the second reason I say that too is because we're also gonna have to factor in the fact that if we do open a new fire station, we're gonna need to factor in to the operating budget, the personnel. So that gives us time to be able to figure out how we would increase that budget as well. So the other things that are down there, no, I don't think that they're ready for prime time. So I would say that the list that you have is the list, in my opinion. The only other thing I do want to say is, for me, it's not about how much we authorize in each year. It's the bottom line figure. So, so 25, yeah, cutting 25 million from the bottom line, essentially. If it's all 25 million in that first one, and then it ends up being more in the out years, I don't care about that. I'm a bottom line type of guy, so I just want, that's where I want to be. The other thing is too, if you come back and you're like, you know what, we did everything we could, the most we can do is 20, then present that and tell us why, you know, so, but I would say that the goal would be to get as close to that 25 million reduction as possible.
Alderman Gavea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Basically the same thing Alderman Clemmons just said. I'd like to see us under 30 a year, but at the end of the day, if you cut it from a different year and the bottom line's the bottom line, I'll get on board with it. I won't object because of that. And kind of the honorable mention is going to be the fire station for me. That Pine Hill station is kind of a mess right now, and every time I drive by it, I kind of feel bad for the people who have to work at that one and not any of the other ones. So it would be nice to have a new one down there. So that's kind of where I stand right now with it. But I would like to see the cuts. Whether we can make it the 30 a year, that's fantastic. But bottom line's bottom line. So.
Okay.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, a couple things. One, if we cut 5 million out of each year, I want to know what it does to the projects that are up on that list. I want to know what the impact is, and does it ultimately drive up the total cost of the project because we move part of it out? Right now, you've got 30 million already bonded. You can't get less than 30 and 25, it's already bonded. So that number's fixed in place, and then you can't do anything else that's on the list.
Right.
I don't know if we can do that. The other thing is, I've had extensive discussions with Chief Buxton on the fire stations, and they're not gonna know what needs to be done until that engineering study is done, which is just put in place, and I believe it's gonna be delivered sometime around the end of the year, like in December. And that's going to have recommendations. We've had some discussions about the airport fire station, which is in terrible shape for a number of reasons. And we think we we have an idea of keeping it on the airport and rebuilding it there, which would cut the cost down because you won't have to pay for the land. We already own the land. And the initial, at least the initial thought is that we would not have to add additional trucks or personnel in the initial build. So, but all of that's gonna be predicated on the study. The other thing is that, you know, they're looking at moving the ladder truck out of Amherst Street, you know, no matter what they do to the floor because of the weight of that thing. And again, they'd move the people with it, so no more personnel. The personnel will be the key. If we think the bond's expensive, if you added 16 additional people to the fire department, that'd be pretty expensive too. So they do have a long-range thought process, but until they get that study, you know, there may be other things that need to be done, like right now the roof at Connet Road is leaking like a sieve, but I think that might be able to be handled, I think, with cash. I don't want to speak for the mayor. But when that study comes out, and then we also talked about funding the same type of analysis for the 20 school buildings, so we have a much better idea of what needs to be done and when. We don't want to end up like Manchester, where all of a sudden, whoop, we got $900 million of problem. You think the 5 million something? Try adding 900 million to that list. So I think we've done a pretty good job, and that's the right reason for so interested in deferred maintenance, because if you don't do the small things, they end up being big things. So again, I think if we prioritize which of these projects are important, you can move the numbers around. Some of them you probably can't delay too much, but you could phase them and put some of the spending in 25, you know, 27, you know. But it's a living document. You know, whatever, you know, if we stamp this right now and approve this, it would change next year. So I wouldn't be hung up on the out years with definite numbers other than a plan, because I guarantee things will change.
Okay. So do you know what, okay, do you know what we need or we want from you?
I do,
Okay.
Madam President. I think probably the best thing for me to do now is to take the homework assignment and ask that we convene again in a week or two to continue the conversation. And, you know, I think we made some great progress tonight, so thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, Alderman Clemmons,
Motion to adjourn.
motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? We're adjourned at 8:40. Thank you, everyone.